The first topic, now I'm not used to these slides, so I apologize, I'll do my best, is this question of must there be a lost decade? By which I mean permanently high unemployment, stagnation, and so forth and so on. Let me go quite quickly over this. There's a couple of original points to be made. This is the history of the US economy, ups and downs. Simply notice how terrible the drop in output was compared to the last 50 years in this recent recession. Also compare, by looking at the amount of black pixels above the line, how wimpy the recovery was. But two combined means there's no way, Jose, even if you grow at 2%, which the world seems to think is good, that you are ever going to have the 6% growth you need, not only to hire all the new kids coming out of school and the new immigrants, but to rehire the millions that were laid off. So here we are with this great recovery, masses of stimulus in a wretched employment situation. Those data are very sobering. What do you do to recover? What are the sources of big growth? How do you create jobs? How do you create jobs and growth but not irritate the bond market by reckless Keynesian spending? And I'm in Australia where Keynes is an even dirtier word than at home. I mean, this is the age, pace, of austerity. What do you do? The private sector is dead in the water. The Woody Brocks are deleveraging. There's no industrial revolution a la Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, which between 1994 and 2000 drove up by 8.9% capital spending in the private sector in my country, which saved Bill Clinton, permitted the unemployment rate to plummet, and created a fiscal surplus. Those types of industrial revolutions, you can't call an order in from heaven. You sort of have to wait another 40 years till the next one comes, so you can't plan on that. Exports aren't going to do it. The Woody Brocks aren't going to do it. Where's the growth come from? Well, we can't use fiscal policy. If you haven't noticed, our deficit is now being made to fall, just as in England, as in Greece, because we simply will lose our welcome in the bond market. The terror is we, too, will find our refinancing costs go up 400 basis points, as in Italy and many other countries, and it can be much higher than that if things get worse. And then you're bust for other reasons. It turns out, if you draw on advanced macroeconomic theory of a kind that's rarely ever cited, that there is a solution, and it's the only solution that satisfies deductively a series of things that everybody in this room would agree to. So this is not a left-wing or a right-wing story. The answer comes from the fact that, as in the history of science, where progress was stymied for centuries by using bogus terms like phlogiston or the ether, which Einstein showed actually never existed for propagation of light. Definitions and clarity of terms matter. The problem today in the Western world in this direction is that the word deficit has no meaning at all. Country A spends $4 trillion a year and has tax receipts of 3, so it has a deficit of $1 trillion. In my country, that means the Treasury, not the Fed, must issue $1 trillion of bonds. Must. Now, country B, it's odd. It spends $4 trillion. It has tax receipts of 3, but it has no deficit. That's a paradox. Let me restate it. On the left, it has a deficit in the eyes of the bond market. It's sticking more debt on the shoulders of the children who may say, hell no, we won't pay one day. And that's what causes those risk premiums to go up. But on the right, the bond market sort of doesn't see a deficit. The point here could not be more important, and it is never made, not by Paul Krugman's and neo-Keynesians. And the point, of course, is that country A spends all $4 trillion on defense interest rate payments and income maintenance transfer payments. None of that produces anything to pay off that borrowing. It's stuck on the shoulders of the children who may default. But in the second case, the bond market's happy and doesn't see a deficit because $1 trillion of the 4, that is to say, all the spending above what's covered by tax receipts, is in not investments in infrastructure of a very broad kind, but investments in the subsets of infrastructure that can be shown to be profitable. Right. The distinction was stressed in the most important book in macroeconomic theory, and certainly the most important book in history on fiscal theory, published in 1970 by, once again, Kenneth Arrow and the man who now holds his chair at Stanford, Mordecai Kurtz. The book, unfortunately, was extremely mathematical, so most people couldn't read it. I couldn't care less. They did it right. They showed us that above and beyond Keynes, with animal spirits being low and high, and we had deficits and surpluses, yes, there was a totally different type of government deficit cycle, totally different. There are times when the return on investment in the private sector are high. So the public's capital should flow to the private sector, as when baby boomers came home, I should say their parents, from the war and had no houses, so we built 78 Levitt towns. The private sector ran a deficit for investment that was needed and was good. Then today, of course, we don't need any more McMansions. We don't need, companies have 4.4 trillion of cash. What we need today, of course, are trains that work, bullet trains that work, new electrical grids, and I could go on, at least $1 trillion a year of profitable projects. Let me stress this point. When you haven't put a new roof on the house in 50 years, as England and America have not, the returns to investing in a new roof are much higher than like Switzerland or Japan, you put a new roof on every 5 years, yes? The bang for the buck is huge. When you borrow for profitable investments, the interstate highway system had a 13% rate of return on capital. The Louisiana Purchase, a 2000 rate of return on capital. The ARPANET, now owning and being named the internet, I think was essentially infinite. That's owned by the government. When you earn money, the bond markets don't matter at all. They're happy. They're happy to help you. So I'm proposing a new Marshall Plan, a no-holds-barred, major spending program, which has yet an additional benefit, satisfying yet another axiom that I lay down, that is job creation multipliers. When you borrow, as we have, $1 trillion a year, simply to keep you guys in your jobs, called income maintenance, how many new jobs are created for the borrowing? Answer? None. That's the Robert Barrow at Harvard zero multiplier argument. Excuse me. When you borrow $1 trillion for worthwhile investment, a country that hasn't invested in public infrastructure in decades, you borrow $1 trillion. You're in charge. You get, well, you're going to, in doing all these things, keep, just for a rainy day, 50 to 70 billion in a, to be safe, but the rest goes to 14 subcontractors, yes? Each of whom repeat this, and you have a geometric series. You end up creating masses of jobs that the way we're currently borrowing and spending money, you don't do. So independent of the virtue that you're earning more than enough money to pay off that debt, and none of it goes in the laps of the children and the grandchildren. In addition, you're dealing with a job multiplier story, and you're creating a tremendous number of jobs. And yes, the resources are available, because our housing sector is going to be terrible for many, many years, as is now being admitted, and we have masses of people out of work who can do these kinds of things, for starters. And it generates secondary and other multiplier effects. This is a way of saying we can, indeed, solve the lost decade program. We need a new investment bank with investors from around the world, with analysts paid $2 or $3 million a year to keep them non-corrupt, who do nothing but evaluate different bullet trains. Nancy Pelosi, you're powerful. Nancy wants a bullet train from LA to San Francisco. These objective people using the Arrow-Kurtz calculus will compute that Nancy's train has a rate of return of -4. It'll be posted worldwide. You, the governor of New Hampshire, your smaller train has a rate of return of 16%. You get the money, she doesn't. It's crystal clear. Right, so I will move on because we have other topics. This is just a way of saying there is a way of putting Americans back to work, not upsetting the bond market, and doing what we should have been doing. Oh, and incidentally, as a footnote, raising productivity growth. Apple pie and motherhood.